Romans chapter 1 tells us that every human knows God exists. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 20, it says, "The invisible things of God from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead." So every human that's ever existed knows God. There's a knowledge of God that he baked into the cake for us. But something that's not talked about a lot is the way that Romans chapter 1 ends. In verse 32, it says that people know the judgment of God. Knowing the judgment of God, it says that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. So all mankind not just has a knowledge that God exists, but there's also a knowledge of judgment. So there's a knowledge of law and sin, and of the ultimate failure that we're all going to have when we stand before God. So just think about that for a second. Every human on earth has that inside themselves their whole life. They know God exists, and they know there's going to be judgment where they have to stand before God one day, and they know that the things that they do are worthy of death. And that's in them. That's in all of us, right? And if you're tracking with me, this is the ultimate stage fright. This is the ultimate, self-worth on the line. So in psychology, there's a main theme that everybody needs a sense of personal worth to function. Like if you don't have a strong sense of, it's sometimes described as significance and security. You think of Maslow's hierarchy, talks about that. If you don't have that, you're not able to function. So everybody's always wrestling with the input that they get of not measuring up, right? And then they try to deal with that, through defense mechanisms, right? So think of this: since the fall of Adam and Eve, all mankind has known that there's judgment of God and that we are worthy of death. So we are all constantly confronted in our conscience, in our consciousness, by the fact that we are going to fall short in the ultimate analysis, at the final day, in the judgment, standing before God and all mankind. We're going to be found lacking. And that contributes to a sense of not having personal worth, right? Which makes us unable to function properly, and that's the whole field of psychology, right? So one of the things that's interesting, I think sometimes Christians are a little bit wary of psychology, and rightfully so, perhaps. But there's some interesting things we can look at here. Like if you look up, just Google defense mechanisms, right? And maybe you learned some of this in school, but it's interesting, I think, to look at again. Like there's repression, where you're blocking out distressing memories, thoughts, or impulses; denial, refusing to accept or acknowledge a reality that's too painful to bear, right? Do you see how some of this is, it could apply, right? Like if you sin in a certain way, but your sense of personal worth for you to continue to function as a person, you need to kind of almost trick yourself into the fact that, no, you're actually a good person, right? You are going to be able to stand before God on Judgment Day, right? Like you think of like how like Ray Comfort and The Way of the Master, like you're going down the street, you're talking to an unbeliever, like, oh, are you going to heaven? What do they say? They say, yeah, I'm a good person, right? So everybody's wrestling with this idea, and in order to function, they have to kind of deal with this knowledge that we have built in, that were failures, that were worthy of death on the judgment day, were going to be found lacking. And so everybody does some of this, right? Everybody does a little bit of repression, blocking out memories. Everybody does a little bit of denial, refusing to accept or fully, maybe making excuses or playing the blame game. Projection, attributing one's own thoughts to somebody else. Reaction formation, something. There's all these different things. But you read about it and you're kind of like, oh, this is kind of interesting, right? This is sort of like showing us how we are trying to deal with our sin in our knowledge of sin in a way that's not correct, right? And something that's worth noting is that is the main driving force behind the world moving into this place where it's trying to cast off the law and say that there is no truth, right? And that all these different, societal norms of what's good and bad has just been inherited, by, sometimes, there's a sort of conspiracy along with that of, oppressive classes kind of, making up these things to keep people down and stuff like that. But again, the big idea in the world is just that there is no truth. There is no sort of ultimate reality. There is no sort of ultimate law that's saying you're bad if you're not, keeping up with God's law. So ultimately what they're trying to do is they're trying to deal with this tension. They're trying to deal with this felt, conscious awareness of impending judgment, and that they're worthy of death, and that, their personal worth is tied up in that, right? And they're trying to find a way to function. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to cast off the law. They're trying to cast off the truth. So basically what they're saying is that they're saying, I'm worthwhile because there is no law to say that I'm not, right? Everything that says that I'm not measuring up is just made up. There is no real measure. There is no cosmic law. The big movement, and so for those of us in the church, maybe you're kind of like, okay, yeah, I can see that a mile away. I don't do that. This video is not for me. But hang on a second, because the big movement in church and in religion in general, a lot of the Bible's written about this, is that our tendency as religious folk is to get our worth from how well we're keeping the law, right? This was Jesus's main indictment against the Pharisees. So we're trying to, again, almost say, I have worth because when I'm judged by the law, God's going to see I did pretty good, right? Wasn't perfect, but I did pretty good. So as we go about our lives, as we go about our days, we're getting our sense of personal worth by sort of tricking ourselves that, hey, we're actually doing pretty good, right? And maybe a little bit better version of that is like, oh, I'm doing better than last year. I'm growing, I'm doing better than that guy, and maybe that reminds you of a certain story in the Bible, right? That's not the way that we should be trying to deal with this, right? That's not the healthy way. That's not the biblical way. That's not the gospel. That's not the true Christian way, right? If we're trying to get our worth from the law, we're not going to be holding it all up. We're going to be maybe focusing on some sins as more important than others. We're going to say like, oh, God knows my heart. I stopped doing that, so I'm good now. We're not going to be upholding the entire law. And we're going to be ignoring a lot of scriptures, like in James, where it says if we break one part of the law, we break the whole thing, right? But the other piece here is that living under the law, we'll never have peace that way. We may feel we're still going to have to be kind of doing some of these defense mechanisms, because if we're getting our worth from how well we're doing according to the law, again, it's an imperfect system. And, we're still going to be confronted, in our minds and in our hearts by the fact that we are falling short. And so if we're getting our worth from that, we're never going to have peace. We're always going to be sort of chasing this comfort, this level of having arrived. And we're never going to quite get there. In the system that we're in, we're trying to earn our worth. It's a wage system, right? It's a transactional system. We're trying to earn our worth before God by how well we're keeping the law. And what's interesting is Romans actually says, Romans has a lot to say about this, but in chapter 6, it says, sin shall not have dominion over you because you are not under the law but under grace. There's many other verses we could look at, but the simple truth I want you to come away from here is, if you're living in that system where you're getting your worth from how well you're keeping the law, you're actually giving sin power. You're giving sin, you could say, addictive power in your life when you're getting your worth from how well you're keeping the law. The gospel is believing that we will be found 100% righteous apart from the law on Judgment Day, by grace through faith, believing in the sacrifice of Jesus, that he took away our sin and that he gave us his righteousness, so that when we stand before God on Judgment Day, we will have perfect righteousness. That's the rest that we're supposed to have as Christians. That's the worth that we're supposed to have as Christians. That's how we actually deal with this tension, this trauma, this constant need. We actually do have a need to have personal worth to function properly, right? It's just, where are we getting that, right? Are we, as Paul says in Philippians, are we putting our confidence in the flesh, or are we getting our confidence from the righteousness that comes by faith? God bless you.